Hello everyone, it's Annie and I'm here today with my November wrap-up. I read 20 books. I participated in Nonfiction November and I also read a ton of indigenous authors for Native American Heritage Month. What is my hair doing? Okay. So I read 20 books and my average rating for the month was pretty good. It was 4.138. So not bad if I do say so myself. So as always, I'm going to go from least favorite to most favorite of the month. So stick around to the end of the video to see what my favorite book of this month was. So let's get into it. Okay, so actually there were no 2 or 1 stars or DNFs this month. The lowest rating I had was a 3-star rating, so we're already starting off pretty good. I mean, I would recommend every book I read this month, to be quite honest with you. The first book I'm going to talk about, though, is Galatea, which is the short story by Madeline Miller. And of course, it's a mythology retelling, because that's what she does. And it's about this stone statue of a woman that the sculptor, who's kind of like an incel dude bro, creates. And he makes her into a real woman and kind of forces her to marry him and have his child. It was kind of disturbing. It was just way too short though. It wasn't even 100 pages long. And I know that it's supposed to be a short story, so like that's okay, but it was just hard to find the depth of character in it. But I mean, it was good writing and it was intriguing, so I liked it. 3 stars. The next book is Winter Counts, which is a story about this kind of vigilante guy who goes around when the FBI and the reservation can't really deal with any sort of crime. So he goes around and takes matters into his own hands and beats people up for revenge, like on behalf of other people. So he's already a very interesting character, this main character, and the story starts when heroin begins to make its way onto the reservation, and it hits him very close to home, I'll just say that. So he decides to investigate into where is this heroin coming from and how can we stop it. It was very interesting. This is not the type of book that I usually read. It's like a crime thriller, which is not normally my thing, but it was very intriguing. I did like it. There was just like this whole will they won't they romance type of thing with his ex-girlfriend that he enlists help from throughout the story, and it was fine, I guess, but I just feel like it didn't add anything to the story and it was kind of distracting from everything else. I think it could have been a really, really strong thriller if it just focused on that aspect of the story instead of this also weird romance that was thrown into it. But there was some very hard-hitting scenes in here, scenes that I still remember, which I don't want to spoil anything, but very disturbing stuff as well. So it was very good. I do highly recommend it, but again, it's not something that I usually read, so 3 stars. And then we have Tread of Angels, which is Rebecca Roanhorse's new release. This is a novella, and I'm giving it 3 stars because I was really in the mood for something fantasy-wise, because I had been reading a ton of nonfiction this month, and I just really wanted something with a storyline that was going to be interesting. And it was a fine. I don't know. It was okay. I think actually this might be my least favorite read of the month, so we're gonna redo that order, but yeah, I think this is my least favorite of the month. I just was expecting something great. Like, Black Sun was amazing and so unique. This was kind of another take on angels and demons, like, living together. And it was okay. I don't know, it gave me some Arcane vibes actually, because at the center of the story was this older and younger sister relationship, which was really interesting, which is something that I do always enjoy in books. So that was cool. But again, there was like this weird romance, like getting back together with your ex thing, and it's like, I do not care about that. I care about the sister storyline, because one sister, the younger sister, gets arrested for murder and she swears she's innocent, so the older sister is going to try and prove that she's innocent, and that was an interesting part of the story. But then we have this older sister getting back together with her ex, and will they won't they, and it's like, okay, like, I don't know, that's not what I'm here for. So it was a little bit of a disappointing read to me, but still interesting. Okay, now on to 3.5 stars, which is The Queer Principles of Kit Webb by Kat Sebastian. This had been on my to-read list for a while now, and I just wanted something fun and fluffy again because there was a lot of nonfiction this month and I was getting a little bit bogged down. So I really enjoyed this story. It's kind of a class traitor romance. So we have this man, Kit, who is the owner of this coffee shop, but he's also a highwayman. And that's very interesting. But then this class traitor person comes and enlists his help in not murdering, but in robbing his very rich father. And of course they fall in love, and it was good. It was good. I mean, it could have been better, like there wasn't that much depth to it, but that's not what I was reading it for. I was reading it for a fun historical romance, and that's what I got, so I liked it. Okay, so now on to the 4 stars. First, we have actually a middle grade story, which is The Star That Always Stays by Anna Rose Johnson, who is an Ojibwe author. And the story is that this takes place, I believe, in the 1920s, I believe. Don't quote me on that. And this girl's family, her mom and dad get divorced at a time when that does not happen, so that was interesting depth to the story as well. Her mom and dad get divorced, and her mom is going to remarry. And in this new family, she's not allowed to say that she is part Ojibwe, and she has to keep that part of her identity a secret. And it's just it's a very slow moving, but also very comforting and very real look into that childhood, and it was so good. Like, this really took me by surprise. It was really, really good. I just picked it up on a whim. I had never heard of it before, and when I first saw it, I'm like, you know what? This sounds really interesting, and it gave me very much Anne of Green Gables vibes, and it's quite short, so I definitely highly recommend this middle grade, especially if you're into historical middle grade, which is a genre of mine that I love. So absolutely check this one out. It is so, so good, and I think criminally underrated. And then we have Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet by Thich Nhat Hanh. I enjoyed this. It was actually kind of slow going for me though. I think the problem is that I've just read too many of his books, and there's only so much you can say about mindfulness. There's only so many new things that you can say, so many new ways that you can put the same concept. So it was interesting. There wasn't as much about environmentalism as I expected, as the title suggests, but that was an interesting intersection of mindfulness and environmentalism. So if you're interested in either or both of those topics, I definitely recommend this. It was very interesting, and it was pretty short too, so it's definitely worth a read. Obviously, Thich Nhat Hanh was a genius, and you really should read his books if you haven't. I highly, highly recommend any of his books, but this is a great place to start. And then we have Kosher Soul by Michael Twitty, and I had read Michael Twitty's other book, which is The Art of Cooking or something, The Cooking Gene, yeah, The Cooking Gene, and I really liked that as well. I think I gave that one 4 stars too. So this book was supposed to be an intersection between his Jewish and Black identity, and Jewish and Black food specifically. He's a chef, he is a food writer, and the reason why I didn't give this 5 stars is because there was not enough about food in the book. I definitely expected it to have more about the intersection of Black and Jewish food, because that would have been fascinating. And I mean, it was still fascinating, but there was a lot less of that than I wanted. I definitely wanted it to be more about food because that's what it seems like it would be on the cover. So I just felt like there was a little bit of false advertising there, but it was definitely very interesting. And then we have the Found in Translation book club pick, which is Sanak, and this was a very interesting little book. I listened to it on audio. The audio was great. I definitely recommend that. It was kind of a set of vignettes of this Inuit woman's life. Her name is Sanak, and the life of like the people in her family and her neighbors around, I believe, the turn of the century in the 1900s, and when white people came to where she lived in Canada, and that was very, very interesting. The reason it's not a 5-star because it was absolutely fascinating and I loved it. I think that Sanak and her daughter were two of the most compelling characters I've ever read about. They had a very interesting relationship, and all of the characters really jumped, not off the page because I didn't read it physically, but jumped in my ears or something, I don't know. But they were felt very alive and very, very interesting. And just to know that the author who wrote this actually lived through that type of life was so fascinating to read about. And I really want to know more about the author after reading this, but the reason why it's not a 5-star is just because it started to get a little bit repetitive, and apparently in the afterword that is because the author wrote the first like 2/3 or 3/4 of the book at one time, and then she went back years later and finished the book. So that's might have been a problem why it got a little bit repetitive towards the end, but that was really the only issue I had with it. It was super fascinating, and I definitely recommend you read this book. Next, we have Kingdom of Characters by Jing Su, and this was a look at the Chinese writing system throughout the decades. And it was very interesting. Of course, I love languages. If you've been following me for a long time, you know that I was a linguistics major in undergrad, and this kind of thing is just super fascinating to me. However, this book had way too much information in it. It felt like I was reading a scholarly paper published in a linguistics journal rather than a pop nonfiction book, you know what I mean? It was not... I mean, it's not that it was difficult to understand. There was just so much unnecessary information going on, all kinds of tangents that we did not need. So that's why it's a 4 instead of a 5, because the subject matter was so interesting, and I feel like I learned a lot about it, about how Chinese writing went from the printing press and how it moved from traditional to simplified characters with Mao, and how we got to learn how to type Chinese on both a typewriter and a modern computer, and it was very interesting. I just felt like it could have been severely edited down to make it more easily digestible. So that's my opinion on it, but I definitely do recommend you read it, especially if you're at all interested in language stuff. Okay, so the next book is A Minor Chorus by Billy Ray Belcourt, which is their newest book. It's a novel, so it's fiction. And their first book was nonfiction, the collection of essays. This book was very short again. However, I think it was a little bit too literary for me. It was good, like the writing was undeniably good. It's about this man this First Nations man in Canada who is doing his English thesis as like PhD student and kind of grappling with his identity also as a gay man, and it was interesting. It definitely felt kind of autobiographical, to be honest, from what I know about the author. It was just a little bit too highbrow for me. Not that I didn't understand what he was saying, but there was just a lot of a lot of navel gazing. It was interesting, like it was good. I'm rating it a 4-star, it was good. But it was just a lot for me at the time, and maybe I wasn't like super in the mood for something like that. But that's all I have to say about it. It was good, and I am glad that I read it. But that is the gist of it, so if you're not looking for something like that right at this moment, I would wait until you are. And the last 4-star is Calling for a Blanket Dance. This is another contemporary novel by an indigenous author, and it was kind of an interesting look at a family. So every chapter was from a different point of view, mostly throughout this family. So the book actually starts with a very disturbing image of the father in this family getting beaten half to death by the Mexican police when trying to cross the border to America, totally legally, by the way, and that is kind of the catalyst for everything else that happens in this story. And the main character of the story is not him, it's actually his son, and how that kind of changes everything in their lives. And it was very interesting. There was a lot of disturbing stuff like that, so that's why it's not a 5-star for me, because it was really hard to read at times because of that really difficult stuff. So definitely check content warnings, but it was really well done, and it definitely deserves all the praise that it gets. Okay, so now we're on the 4.5 stars, of which there are 3. So first we have a short story collection, which is A Calm and Normal Heart by Chelsea T. Hicks, which is such an amazing collection. I really, really enjoyed this. Of course, with every short story collection, there's going to be some that just aren't as good as some of the other ones, which is why it's a 4.5 and not a 5. But one thing specifically that I absolutely adored about the short story collection was its emphasis on the Osage language revitalization. So it's all over the cover, which you can see. Their alphabet is so amazing. I learned so much about the revitalization effort of the language of the Osage Nation, and it was just so fascinating. There was a lot of it within the story itself as well, and as a language nerd, that was amazing for me. I loved seeing that so much. The stories themselves were all very compelling, very interesting, and again, there were some that I didn't love as much as others, but most of them, I'd say like a good 80%, 85% of them I really loved and were 5 stars. So I highly recommend this. I have not been seeing anyone talk about it, and I just found this in my library and I was so excited about it because I had never heard of it before. So I really think that more people need to be reading this because it's definitely a gem. Okay, next we have not Winter's Orbit, we have Ocean's Echo by Everina Maxwell, who is the author of Winter's Orbit. So Winter's Orbit was her debut. This is her second novel, and this was amazing. I buddy read this with books past bedtime with Jess, so thank you very much. I really loved this book so much. I don't know, because I loved Winter's Orbit so much, which is why I think I'm comparing them a little bit. And maybe that's unfair to this book, because I really did love this book, but I think realistically it is a 4.5 and not a 5 star, because the whole thing with this is that there's this man called Tennell, and he is what's called a reader. And readers in this alien society are not very well liked. They're actually not liked at all because they can read people's minds, and that's like taboo. And then there's this other man called Surit who is an architect, and he can kind of control people's minds. And one day Tennell kind of annoys his legislator aunt into forcing him to be sent into the military because she's sick of his antics. And he is forced into the military, conscripted, and he is going to be forced to sync with Surit's mind as like a way of controlling Tennell's reader abilities. And I kind of hyped that up too much in my mind. I thought this was going to be more of like a mind-soul link situation romance. And I mean, it definitely was. There was a lot of soulmate stuff going on here, which was awesome. But I think that the sync itself was like kind of a bad thing in the story. And I know Jess said the same thing. Like, it wasn't like this big romantic thing. It was kind of like, it's exactly what it sounds like it's controlling someone and it's not good. But Surit does not want to sync with Tennell. He says that, you know, it's against his beliefs because he doesn't want to force someone to do something that they don't want to do. So they have to then figure out together how to get out of this mess. And of course they fall in love. And I loved these two characters though so much. Everina Maxwell does that so well. They had such great chemistry. However, I do wish there was a little bit more romance. There was definitely more romance in Winter's Orbit, and while I do love sci-fi and politics and stuff, I would have just liked a little bit more of the romance on page. But yeah, so that's why it wasn't exactly perfect, but I loved it a lot, and I will definitely keep reading Everina Maxwell's books. Okay, the last 4.5 star is Shudder by Ramona Enerson, and I loved this book way more than I expected. This is another thriller to do with crime, similar to Winter Counts, but I loved the horror-esque twist in here because the main character is a crime photographer. So she like goes to all these crime scenes and she photographs these really heinous scenes like dead bodies strewn across the road. That is the opening scene. The opening scene is one of the most impactful things I have ever read as the start of a novel. I think it was genius. So that was awesome. That hooked me right away. And so the main character photographs these crime scenes, but she also can see dead. Like, she can see the ghosts of the dead, and this one ghost keeps following her and is kind of forcing her to figure out what happened to her, because her case has been dismissed as a suicide, but she swears that she did not kill herself, and she wants the main character to figure out who killed her. It was just fascinating. I absolutely loved it. It was just great. I mean, there's really not much else to say. It was a little short, so maybe I wanted a little bit more out of it, a little bit more depth, but I really loved the main character. I think she was very strong, and I just loved that little paranormal twist. That really made it a whole lot better. That was awesome. Okay, 5 more books, and they're all 5 stars. First is a nonfiction, which is Fen, Bog, and Swamp by Annie Proulx. This was a really short book, but it was very packed with information. It's about how fens, bogs, and swamps, these wetlands that we kind of take for granted or think like are ugly and we want to build over them, how they're actually super important to the environment and to our lives and how we live our lives, how we're used to. And there's a ton of really interesting history here too, especially about the bogs in England and Ireland. Very interesting stuff about how these wetlands all over the world serve different purposes for humanity and the earth. And it was just really interesting. I think a big theme this year in nonfiction was environmentalism, which is great to see. So it was super interesting, and there's no reason not to give it 5 stars. Another easy 5 stars was Weaving Sundown in a Scarlet Light by Joy Harjo. You know, I love Joy Harjo. I read her memoir Poet Warrior a while back, I think actually last year for Nonfiction November, and this was her most recent poetry collection. It's 50 poems for 50 years. So she was the poet laureate for the United States, and this is a collection of 50 of her favorite poems that she's ever written over the past 50 years of her life. And it was breathtaking. I mean, she's one of the best poets in the country, and I say the world. So of course this was a 5 stars. You have to read it. If you have not read her poetry, it's really breathtaking. I highly recommend you do, because it's beautiful. And then we have There, which is a contemporary, very hard-hitting contemporary that took a twist that I never saw coming, and I have to thank everyone for that. Because everyone who has talked about this book, thank God you have kept the twist under wraps. Like, no one has spoiled it for me. Whatever you do, if you're gonna read this book, do not spoil it for yourself. Don't look up reviews, don't look up spoilers, just read it cold. It was so surprising and so heart-wrenching and awful in the best way possible. The writing was absolutely stunning in this book, and it definitely deserves all the awards and accolades it has gotten. This was another easy 5 stars. The general gist of it is that it follows the lives of 12 Native people from all around the country, and then at the end they all kind of convene together. They're going to the same powwow, and they're traveling there, and then something happens at the powwow, and I definitely don't want to give anything away other than that. That's all I knew going into it, and that's all you should know. It was an amazing, amazing story. Definitely very sad. I will say though, if you're sensitive at all, you should look up content warnings for this, because yeah, while the twist is great, if you don't know what's going to happen, you should be prepared if it's gonna bother you. So yeah, that is my opinion on this. This was an amazing, amazing book. Definitely one of the just objectively best books I've ever read. It was just an amazing, amazing book. Okay, now we're down to the last 2. These are my favorite books of the month. The first one is Daughters of the Year by Danielle Daniel, and this book was so tragic. It's a historical fiction novel about the French coming to Canada and meeting the Algonquins and kind of forcing the women to marry them, and kind of intermarry and have children. And it deals a lot with that. It deals with primarily the forgotten women of history, because I've never read a book talking about this before, and it was so fascinating and very wonderful to have someone write about this. So that was one aspect of the story that is really interestingly explored, how the white people kind of exploited this situation, let's say. So that was very interesting, but there's another thing in this book that is also very something that I really liked, let's say. So that's the LGBT representation. So I don't think this is a spoiler because to me it was incredibly obvious what was going to happen, but even though it was obvious and predictable, it did not take away from the story at all, because the story itself was written so well. It was magic, and even though it was tragic, I loved it so much. So this Algonquin woman and the white man have a child, and the child is like a very big character as well. So it follows mostly the mother and then this child as she grows up, in different points of views. And when there is a I don't know if I should spoil it. Okay, so if you don't want spoilers, skip ahead to the next part. But the child is a lesbian, and that's not allowed in this very Christian community that the French settlers have built, and that is why it's tragic. So I think that it's very easy to see where the story is going, but not in a bad way, because usually predictable has a bad connotation, but I don't think it's bad in this case at all. This was an easy 5-star book. It was stunning, just stunning. I don't know what else to say about it. You really have to read it. It's amazing. And the last and most favorite book that I read this month was White Horse. I adored this book so much. The main character of this book is one of the most amazing main characters I have ever read in my life. She is so spunky, she has snark, she has personality and depth. She's not just a one-note, punk girl. She has so much emotional depth. I don't know how Erica Worth wrote this character. Like, she's amazing. She is such a joy to read through her eyes. So this story starts off with Erica not Erica, that's the author, with the main character finding or being gifted, let's say, this old bracelet that was passed down through her family, and it was her mother's, and she doesn't want the bracelet because her mom disappeared when she was a baby, and she has been harboring these really bad feelings of betrayal about her mother, and she doesn't even know whether her mom's alive or dead. And when she gets gifted this bracelet, she starts having visions of her mom and of this monster, and the horror aspect of this is amazing. There's also really interesting family and friend drama that goes on with it, which I think adds just such an interesting depth to this story. If you bought this for Book of the Month, consider yourself lucky, because this is one of the best books I have read this year. It's definitely going to be one of my favorites of the year. It was just so good. I don't know, it was amazing. The main character is also a big Stephen King fan, and she actually goes to visit the hotel in The Shining, and I thought that was fun. Like, I knew she was a big Stephen King fan, but to know that it also plays a big part in the story itself was very interesting. I love this. I feel like I could say so much more about it, but I would go on and on because I just absolutely love it. And the main character is also an urban Indian, she calls herself, and that was interesting because I didn't really know anything about that distinction, so that was very interesting to me between urban Indians and people who live on reservations, so that was an interesting dynamic. And her family is also very non-traditional but very interesting, so I just love everything about this book. It was amazing and 5 stars, and you should definitely read it. Okay, so that is it for my November wrap-up. Again, 20 books this month. Nonfiction November was so much fun, and I'm so glad that I read so many awesome 5-star books. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below what your favorite book you read in November was. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe to my channel for more bookish videos, and I'll see you next time. Bye!